Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, which will discuss the application requirements for the Smart Supervision Grant Program administered by the Bureau of Justice Assistance. My name is theyve. I am a Policy Analyst and Technical Assistance Lead for Smart Supervision Grantees at the Council of State Governments Justice Center, which provides training and technical assistance to all grantees funded under the Federal Second Chance Act. Before we begin, I have a couple of technical notes. If you encounter a connection or audio problems during this webinar, please call WebEx Technical Support at 1-866-229-3239. We'll also put that number up on the chat box on your screen. Unfortunately, there are some connection issues we may not be able to resolve during the webinar. However, we are recording today's webinar, and everyone who registered will receive an email as soon as it's available on our website at csgjusticecenter.org/NRRC. We should have the webinar posted online early next week. At the end of today's webinar, we will have a few minutes for question and answers from the audience. To ask a question, please enter it in the Q&A panel on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. You can ask questions at any point during the webinar, and we will do our best to answer as many questions as possible before we end at 3 p.m. Eastern today. Our primary speaker today is Julie James, Senior Policy Advisor with the Bureau of Justice Assistance in the U.S. Department of Justice. Julie oversees the Smart Supervision Program on behalf of BJA's Policy Office. Also joining us today is Dr. Nicole Jarrett, Deputy Program Director at the Council of State Governments Justice Center. Nicole oversees all technical assistance delivered to federal awardees. We're very grateful to Julie and Nicole for finding the time to lead today's webinar. In the next slide, Dr. Jarrett is going to provide an overview of the CSG Justice Center and the National Reentry Resource Center. Dr. Jarrett?
Thank you, Daisy. The Council of State Governments Justice Center is a national nonprofit organization that serves policymakers at the local, state, and federal levels from all branches of government. Staff provides practical, nonpartisan advice and evidence-based, consensus-driven strategies to increase public safety and strengthen communities. The National Reentry Resource Center was established by the Second Chance Act, which you'll hear more about later, to provide education, training, and technical assistance to states, tribes, territories, local governments, service providers, nonprofit organizations, and corrections institutions, all working on prisoner reentry. The Resource Center is administered by the Council of State Governments Justice Center through support from the Bureau of Justice Assistance. To learn more about the National Reentry Resource Center, please visit csgjusticecenter.org/NRRC. We are constantly adding new content and resources to our website, and we send out a monthly newsletter that provides information about the latest research, funding opportunities, distance learning events, and other news about reentry. To sign up for the newsletter and announcements, please visit csgjusticecenter.org/subscribe, the link that's on your screen after today's webinar. At this point, I'll hand it over to Daisy, who will provide an overview of the Second Chance Act and a historical overview of funding and geographic distribution of past Smart Supervision grantees.
Thank you, Dr. Jarrett. I'd like to share a bit of background on the Second Chance Act for those of you who are not as familiar with it. Passed in 2008, the Second Chance Act authorizes a variety of federal grant programs that support state and local governments, tribal entities, and nonprofit organizations in providing evidence-based services intended to reduce recidivism. The Second Chance Act grants have been available since 2009 from the Department of Justice, but the Smart Supervision Program, some of you might know was formerly referred to as the Smart Probation Program, was first introduced in 2012. In fiscal year 2016, $68 million were appropriated for Second Chance Act programs. Dollars will be distributed between adult and juvenile programs and across solicitations. So it's difficult to predict right now exactly how much will be available for each program. To date, 4 different solicitations have been released by BJA and will be awarded using fiscal year 16 dollars. Today we will only be talking about the Smart Supervision Grant Program. But there are other solicitations available under the Reentry program for adults with co-occurring substance abuse and mental disorders. That solicitation closes on March 30th, 2016, and you can find more information on that program at the web address on your screen. Also, the Comprehensive Community-Based Adult Reentry Program Utilizing Mentors is a solicitation that's out right now, and it closes on April 12th. Another solicitation that closes on April 12th is the Technology-Based Career Training Program for Incarcerated Adults and Juveniles. As previously noted, if you'd like to receive the most up-to-date announcements anytime new solicitations are released, please sign up for our Justice Center's newsletter at our website or go directly to csgjusticecenter.org/subscribe. On the screen now is an overview of Smart Supervision Program awards for the past 4 years. While there's been a shift in the total number of awards, there's an average of about 7 awards per year. The total amount of awards, the total amount of funds awarded for this grant program since 2012 has been on a relative incline. However, please note that we're not presently certain about the total dollar amount that would be allocated for Smart Supervision. This screen merely illustrates a historical number of grants awarded and the total amount awarded per fiscal year to date. I encourage you to visit BJA's website at www.bja.gov and click on the funding link to explore how much each grantee has been awarded. More importantly, later on in this webinar, Julie James will provide guidance on the maximum amount awardable under this grant program. As you can see on this screen, there have been 29 different state and county awardees in 20 different states across the nation. Again, I encourage you to visit BJA's website and its funding page specifically for more information on state and counties that have received awards. This site will also provide you with examples of successful applications as such as the one submitted by Maricopa County Adult Probation Department in fiscal year 2014. The NRRC has provided technical assistance to all Smart Supervision grantees referenced here, including Maricopa County, and has served as the conduit for peer-to-peer conversations, has fostered exchanges of lessons learned, and supported jurisdictions aiming to reduce recidivism. Collectively, Smart Supervision grantees have planned very exciting initiatives with some areas of overlap, which have offered excellent opportunities for peer-to-peer learning. Some of the more common areas of interest are things like expanding supervision activities to include sanctions and incentives models, adding dosage supervision models, cognitive behavioral change programs and mentoring services, or a focus on risk and needs assessment, including validating instruments, implementing new models for case planning, and developing a quality assurance framework. There's also been a great interest in training for supervision staff and community partners to move towards more effective and collaborative supervision services. On behalf of the NRRC, we look forward to supporting efforts to reduce recidivism and advance the fields of community corrections through innovation and implementation of evidence-based practices. Now, without further ado, I hand the mic over to Julie James, who will tell us more about BJA and then walk us through the 2016 Smart Supervision Solicitation. Julie?
Great, thanks so much, Daisy. At BJA, our guiding principles are to reduce crime, recidivism, and unnecessary incarceration, and promote a safe and fair justice system. And to do that, it would be impossible without the partnership of you all, the field, state and local agencies who are doing this work. And so it's our mission to provide leadership and services to support you all to achieve safer communities. And as you can see in this slide, we've been able to do that in reentry, supervision, and other related areas, with over $300 million in investments across the country. So the map that Daisy showed really focused only on this program, but there's another great map on the NRC website that shows both the Department of Justice investments in reentry as well as our other federal partners, and there's really a lot of coordination, collaboration going on across the nation. Moving on, I wanted to talk a little bit about the SMART suite at BJA. We work on across the justice system. My focus is on community corrections and justice systems reform, but a number of my other colleagues work in different areas, and we're trying to bring the same level of rigor and evidence-based practices to all these different programs. And so we're learning from one another and also unifying the approach through practitioner research partnerships. That both helps improve our collective knowledge in the field, and it also, for the practitioners, really provides a targeted and really focused way to innovate and to implement evidence-based practices and make course changes as appropriate in your program. So you'll see later in the presentation that this is one of those programs that does require a research practitioner partnership. These other programs listed here have the same requirements. You can learn a little bit more about the programs and the SMART Suite generally by clicking on the link or visiting our programs page for the SMART Suite. So this solicitation is available on our website at the link that's shown here on the screen, and the all-important due date is April 11th, 2016. I encourage you to apply early. Technical issues do arise with applying through GMS, and you want to leave plenty of time for those issues to be resolved. Many times there are multiple attachments to your uploading and so forth, so it's nice to have that finalized and submitted well in advance. And there also on this page is the link to the program page for SMART Supervision. I know we've already gotten some questions about eligibility for this program. Eligible applicants are limited to states, units of local government, and federally recognized Indian tribal governments. So in this context, that typically means state and local agencies, whether that's through a statewide supervision agency or Department of Corrections, or on the local level could be a judicial district, an independent probation department, or other justice agency. It's not required that the lead applicant be a supervision agency, although it typically is. We welcome applications, so relatedly, we welcome applications that involve 2 or more entities that will carry out the award activities, but one eligible entity must be designated as the applicant, and then the others must be proposed as subrecipients. So, the questions that we've received in the past, can county agencies that provide services to supervisees but don't provide community supervision directly, can they apply? The answer is yes, as long as it's a unit of state or local government, and the community supervision agency is on board with the program as demonstrated with a letter of commitment. Nonprofits, if they're not associated with the government, if they're not non-governmental, then they're not permitted to apply. That's just the eligibility requirement for this program. Other Second Chance Act programs do allow nonprofits to apply. Parole boards, another question we get. Yes, if there's yes, the answer is yes, and typically that would be if they have supervision under their jurisdiction. Another question we've received in the past is whether pretrial supervision agencies are eligible. And unfortunately, due to the statutory language that authorizes this program and the appropriations language, it is limited to probation and parole. And the history is that it used to be just probation, and we were happy to know that Congress did expand that to parole just a few years ago. We also had a question about whether we prefer statewide or countywide projects. I think the map sort of speaks for itself. I think there are benefits to both approaches, and certainly states and locals are organized differently as well, so we don't have a preference for one type of project over another. Moving on to the goals of the program, we are hoping to develop and test innovative strategies and implement evidence-based probation and parole approaches that improve supervision success rates, increasing community safety and reducing violence and other crimes by effectively addressing individuals' risks and needs and reducing recidivism. And the way we do this and hope to achieve this is through improving supervision strategies that will reduce recidivism, through promoting and increasing collaboration among agencies and officials who work in probation, parole, pretrial, law enforcement, treatment, reentry, and related community corrections fields. Develop and implement strategies for identification of high-risk, high-need supervisees, including subsets of that population, which can serve as a model for other agencies. And then developing and implementing developmentally appropriate strategies for the identification, supervision, and treatment of young adult supervisees that also may serve as a model. So these are 4 of them, and then the next slide is a continuation of the objectives, but just wanted to speak really quickly to these 2 subpopulations that we pull out, high risk, high needs. As I'm sure most of you on the phone know, our resources are best used when they're focused on the high risk, high needs population. And you can get the greatest return on investment, greatest improvement and reduction in recidivism when we focus on this population. So we've structured our grant program to help focus on those approaches that will be most effective and across the nation also, if replicated, could yield great outcomes. The focus on young adults comes from recent developments in brain science showing that young adults, and by that there's no hard age cutoff here, but typically we're talking about people who would typically qualify as juveniles, so 15, 16, up through 24, 25, where their cognitive abilities aren't fully developed and look quite different and pose different challenges as the supervision population, and also present different opportunities as well. So it's the time moment for intervention. And so in recognition of those advances in that field, we're hoping to support the field of community corrections as you all innovate effective approaches to address this population. This is the second slide of objectives. And so the last 3 are to develop and implement strategies to identify and enroll uninsured supervisees into Medicaid or other insurance through health exchanges, and to connect them to treatment and health providers as appropriate, to objectively assess and or evaluate the impact of innovative and evidence-based supervision and treatment strategies. And finally, to demonstrate the use and efficacy of evidence-based practices and principles to improve the delivery of probation and parole supervision strategies and practices. I'm going to go back to that first bullet and just talk about Medicaid expansion and enrollment and engagement and health. We've learned as well about the strong link between justice and health outcomes, and that this population is poised to, if they receive proper and appropriate health and mental health treatment at the right time, that their outcomes, their life outcomes beyond justice outcomes can be greatly improved. Excuse me. And so building on this knowledge, we really want to support, in the wake of the Affordable Care Act, supervision agencies as they work to improve those linkages for this population. Moving on to deliverables, we have some specific deliverables that we're asking for. One is an action plan. We discovered through several years of the program that it took a little while for the researcher and the practitioner to really get on the same page about what the evaluation questions are, what the logic model is, and how they're going to work together. And so we, in partnership with the National Reentry Resource Center, built this process as a checkpoint, essentially, a milestone, that helps us and the grantees really go about in a smart and thoughtful way a collaboration and building that relationship between the supervision agency, research partner, and technical assistance provider. The action plan that you all can visit this in advance just so you know what you might be getting into, and then it helps sort of fill out the picture, is at this spot, this link that is on the screen, and we call it the Smart Supervision Planning and Implementation Guide. And it's a really great tool that we have refined over the course of the last couple of years and is in really good shape for the next fiscal year. And then the next deliverable is the final analysis and report by the research partner. I would encourage you to think beyond these two. These are the sort of minimum requirements. There are going to be a number of other deliverables that may be useful, both on the research side and the practitioner side. For example, one-pagers describing the project, PowerPoints, and other data analysis that the researcher may be able to provide. So I encourage you to think beyond that in crafting your program and deliverables, but these are the minimum requirements. And then on to mandatory project components. All projects are required to include the following components. First, to demonstrate agency commitment to the proposed initiative. Second, to clearly demonstrate the appropriate use and integration of evidence-based principles, such as the assessment of risk and needs. Document a baseline recidivism rate based on historical data, and we'll talk more about that later, and to incorporate a research partner to assist in data collection and analysis, problem assessment, strategy development, or monitoring monitoring and evaluation performance. So to the point of this research partner, we've gotten questions in the past about whether that needs to be have a particular, whether that can be an independent consultant, a university, private, nonprofit, et cetera. And the answer is all of the above. It could be an independent consultant or located in an academic institution, could be a state statistical analysis center or a research organization. The idea, though, and you'll see this in the solicitation, is that we just want to make sure the research partner has demonstrated expertise conducting the type of work, and ideally partnering with probation or parole supervision agencies in the past. Allowable uses for award funds. There are a number of these, and we have two slides full of them. And this just provides an illustration of the kinds of activities that would be permitted under the program. So first, to increase the capacity of states, localities, and tribal communities to help probation and parole agencies improve supervision strategies. I see that parole is not in here, but should be. We want to test new policies and strategies in community supervision and treatment to increase public safety and generate savings. We're also interested in testing new policies and strategies to respond to the unique challenges posed by young adult supervisees. We would support developing and or deploying information technology to meet the objectives and goals of the program. We also would support analyzing and implementing changes to policies and practices that guide community supervision conditions and revocation procedures. On the next slide, 5 more allowable uses. We would support promoting the use of evidence-based programs and strategies by service providers that provide treatment, aftercare, reentry services, and alternatives to incarceration to those on supervision. Also, to plan and strategize for how expanded options for access to health care can enhance the health and safety outcomes for supervisees. We would also support expanding collaboration and strategic partnerships between community supervision and law enforcement agencies. or to convene an interagency working group to analyze the jurisdiction's probation population drivers and make recommendations. And finally, evaluate the results of the new strategies and tools tested through the initiative. So you'll note that these are not just, pick one, but one or more of these is allowable. And they're broad enough that I think a lot of the programs that are typically proposed, most if not all, do fall under those umbrellas. So onto the selection criteria. This is the important information for applicants to know, because these are the criteria that the peer reviewers use to score the programs, and we very heavily rely on and appreciate the work that our peer reviewers do to help us understand the strengths and the weaknesses of various proposals. So we're looking at the abstract, and then within the program narrative, which is a summary, right, of course, of the narrative, and within the narrative, the statement of the problem is 15% of the total score. We'll go into each of these categories as well shortly. Project design and implementation counts for 35% of the total score. Capabilities and competencies for 25%. The plan for collecting data for the solicitation's performance measures accounts for 5% of the overall score. Impact outcomes, evaluation, and sustainment accounts for 10%. And the budget accounts for 10% as well of the total score. I refer you to now that pages 13 to 22 of the solicitation for a full list of what's required, what must be submitted for an application. Now, turning to the statement of the problem, we're really looking for a description of the problem that you're trying to address. We want to know the size and makeup of the population. We want to know about your agency and how it's structured. And how, right. And then we also want to know about your current use of evidence-based strategies and the current violation rate, and translate that to a baseline recidivism rate. Now, in the solicitation, it explicitly says violation. However, I don't have a preference about what counts for you as a recidivism rate. Some agencies don't have information like revocation rate and can't break it down based on a variety of factors. Some agencies don't have recidivism rates such as rearrests, reconviction, or reincarceration as measures of their population. So use what you have, use the best that you have, and the thing that's the most relevant for your problem and for your program as you propose it. Next, in the statement of the problem, we ask you to describe how the implementation will improve the effectiveness and efficiency of supervision, and to explain the inability of the agency to fund the program without federal assistance. Moving on to the next criterion, project design and implementation. We're asking applicants to clearly articulate how the goals and activities established for the project will address the goals, objectives, and deliverables as required in the solicitation listed on page 5. We're asking how the project will incorporate the mandatory project components listed on page 6 of the solicitation. And we're allowing which of the allowable uses for award funds you are proposing to use, and those are listed on pages 6 through 7 that describe just with specificity which areas the project will address. We're asking you to use data to support the project design, and we're asking you to describe roles and responsibilities of the research partner and how that role is integrated into the strategy. And we are asking you to indicate the number of people under community supervision who would receive services if this proposal is funded. I think one question we've had in the past is if this is a sort of agency-wide effort to increase adherence to evidence-based practices, what should the target population be, and that would be everyone who is going to benefit from that work. So think about it that way. Regarding the capabilities and competencies, we're asking you to describe the management structure and staffing of the project, and that's really how you plan to manage it, who's in charge, and really looking at the agency responsible and any collaborations that you have. We want to know who on your team can help with implementing, who can help with gathering and analyzing information, who's really going to help that researcher get the data that they need, who's going to help develop a plan and evaluate the program. We would like you to describe the qualifications of the research partner and their prior experience with action research, including prior work with probation or parole agencies and other criminal justice partners. The plan for collecting data, we're happy to say that the performance measures that are required for the solicitation are available for you to review in advance, and they're at the link there. And by applying for the solicitation, all applicants agree that you will report on these measures, and they are final currently, so you can take a look at them. And that is just one of the several grant conditions. All applicants must describe their method and process for collecting and reporting required performance metrics data. And by this, really looking at specificity here. Who is it? What position do they hold? How will data be collected? I mean, I think applicants often get not full credit on this section because they say simply that we will collect the data, and we're really looking for more specificity on how you plan to do that. On impact, outcomes, evaluation, and sustainment, we're looking for you to identify goals and objectives for the program development, implementation, and outcomes. We want to know how you plan to document, monitor, evaluate, and identify the impact of the strategy once it's implemented. We'd like you to outline what data and information will be collected and describe how evaluation and collaborative partnerships will be leveraged to build long-term support and resources for the program. We'd like you to describe a plan for the evaluation of the project and document a collaborative relationship with an objective third-party evaluator, such as a local college or university. And that's just an example here. As I mentioned, you don't have a preference of the affiliation or type of evaluator that you partner with. And then we'd like you to discuss how the effort will be integrated into your current justice system plans or commitments and financial sustainment, as well as the expected long-term results of the program. On the budget, and here we are on the last selection criterion, we are hopeful that we'll be able to make up to 7 awards of up to $750,000 per award. And the award period is expected to be 36 months. We learned from our earlier efforts that lower dollar amounts and less time means less impact, not surprisingly. So we've extended that, reduced the number of awards, but increased the amount and time that you have to implement. And new this year is an optional 24-month follow-up period for research activities only. That is something we're trying out. Not sure what to expect from the applicants, but we have heard that oftentimes when you're trying to follow up on outcomes in the justice system, particularly in supervision, some of those outcomes might not hit, especially if you're talking about, rearrest within 1 year or reconviction within 1 year or 2, that it would be nice to have that time to get those results and within the grant period. We're looking for you to submit a budget that's complete, cost-effective, and allowable. And allowable is reasonable, allocable and necessary for project activities. There are a list of unallowable costs on the OJPD funding website in the Department of Justice Financial Guide. Excuse me. For this program, we don't typically see a whole lot of unallowable costs proposed, and I think the key thing we're looking at is how does the cost, the proposed cost, relate to the objectives of the program and the project that you've proposed. How necessary is it? We want you to include an adequate amount for research data collection and performance measurement and assessment. We don't give a specific dollar amount or percentage because over time, again, we've learned that the scope and nature of the research partner work varies very much depending on the project. And so we are very loath to give a specific number. We do hope that you'll work with a potential partner to scope that out, talk through what an appropriate budget looks like, and potentially talk with more than one, hopefully, potential research partner to work through some of those issues. We do ask that you allocate funding to Department of Justice sponsored grant meetings. And you should estimate the cost of travel from your location and accommodations for 3 staff to attend 2 meetings in Washington, D.C. Some of the opportunities that we've offered in the past include the Second Chance Act conference, which is a huge undertaking that the National Reentry Resource Center puts on. We had a wonderful conference in December with some really terrific national speakers and some great opportunities for grantees to interact and share their experiences and wisdom, as well as subject matter experts on a host of really interesting and relevant issues for our grantees. And then more recently, related to the SMART Suite, we've been developing a couple of different offerings. One, a research practitioner orientation course, which helps kind of speed up and give some good planning time for the practitioners and researchers to come together, again, learning from other grantees and really solidify their approach. And then another is the SMART Suite Fellow Academy. And that's an offering for researchers and practitioners alike to really get at the cutting edge issues in evaluation across the justice system, because it's our belief that as our justice system and really our world becomes more sophisticated, more data-driven, more focused on results, we all need to up our game. And so we've developed these opportunities, and we're excited to be able to offer them to you. We do fund the trainings through other sources, but travel, we expect to pay some of that through grant funds. This solicitation does not require a match, but if you do propose a voluntary match, that then becomes mandatory and subject to audit. Additional attachments we're looking for, which will help fill out your proposal, include letters of support from partners, a project timeline, position descriptions, a disclosure of pending applications. So that's not just any application for any funding, it's applications to fund the same thing that you're proposing in this application. And then a research and evaluation independence and integrity statement, guidance for which is available in the solicitation itself. It'll tell you exactly what we need to know. And then here's some contact information for when you are working on your submission. If you have any issues with or questions about how to submit an application, you should contact their grants.gov customer support hotline or email them. Or contact the Justice Information Center if you have questions about the solicitation specifically. They have a database of frequently asked questions that they can call on, and if it's something that's that they can't answer immediately, they'll refer the question to me, and we'll get it resolved for you. Here are some other resources that we mentioned in the solicitation. These may be well known to you, but they're seminal. Some of them have been around for a little while, but they still are some foundational work. And now I'm going to pause for questions and answers, and I'm glad to see that we have nearly 20 minutes for that.
Hello, great. Thank you, Julie. Really loads of information, and we did have several questions. One thing I'll just address real quickly is that if there's something that appeared on the screen or you didn't quite catch something, please know that you will get an email next week with a link to not only the webinar, but also a PDF of the slides. So you'll have that earlier next week. So turning to the questions, one of the questions that we received is a county who's already received a past award eligible for a new one?
Thanks, Nicole. Yeah, the answer is yes. We don't bar anyone from applying if they've received the award in the past. I will say that if the award is currently active and open, then that would weigh heavily against us making another award. If it's closed, you know, we do like to see new entrants into the field, but if it's a strong proposal, that would certainly not bar us from considering the proposal. I think it's much stronger if it's a current award than if it's closed in the past.
Okay, great. Another question. In regards to when we talked about the objectives, point 3, high risk and high need supervisees, including subsets, would it be acceptable, would an acceptable subset for supervisees be individuals that have been diagnosed with a severe mental illness?
That is a great question because, you know, as we all know, mental illness isn't in itself a criminogenic factor, and it's a responsivity factor. I think that the need is great, and I think you should certainly make the case that if you don't address the you know, from a responsivity perspective, the needs of people with severe mental illness, then their chances of success are greatly reduced. So I would suggest making the case and using data and evidence to support your designs.
Okay, great. Another health-related question. Could an award be used to improve access to Medicaid in conjunction with additional services such as permanent supportive housing?
Great. I'm glad to hear reference to that. We're supporting permanent supportive housing in other contexts. We have a partnership with HUD, as you know, Nicole. And so this is a great question. I think the answer is yes. I mean, we'd have to see the particulars of the proposal, certainly. But if it's within the context of, you know, our objectives, which is related to community supervision, and that's sort of one piece of the program model, you know, that they're pulling together health through this, and then permanent supportive housing through another. I'm not sure, you know, what the funding would be proposed to use. Did the question say, sorry, Nicole, did the question say permanent supportive housing would be supported using grant dollars?
It doesn't specify. It just says, could the award involving Medicaid also be used for other supportive services? And it says, for example, permanent supportive housing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the answer is that there's nothing that it disallows that. And so we would just have to evaluate on our end how reasonable is that in the context of the overall program design as it relates to the program objectives.
Okay, great. Another question around strategies. Does the application need to address all the strategies that were mentioned, or can an applicant just pick strategies that fit their own community? Sure.
So I think the reference is to the allowable uses of funds And let me see if I can skip to that one. Skipping. So these are the strategies that I think are referred to in that question. And the answer is definitely. We don't expect that any one applicant could or should propose all of these things. We would expect probably 2 or more. So there would be like, increase the ability to improve supervision strategies paired with the next slide, evaluate. Let me see if I can even highlight these. Evaluate the new strategies and tools, for example. But yeah, no, not all of those.
Okay. We had a question about youthful offenders. So given that several state-operated juvenile parole agencies serve young adults up to 21 years of age, has there been any discussion between BJA and OJDDP about juvenile agencies serving youthful offenders over the age of 18 being eligible for this particular grant award?
Right. Again, there's no cutoff or specificity in the eligibility about whether it can only be juvenile or only adult. We haven't seen applications. No, I strike that. We have seen applications from juvenile, and that hasn't weighed one way or the other, and we haven't sort of removed them from consideration. So we're open to it.
All right. Do you know if this grant funding opportunity will be available next year?
If only we knew what Congress would do a year in advance. Well, I'm optimistic. In the past several years, this has the support as expressed in dollars and in the appropriation specifically calling out strategies to improve probation and parole supervision has been part of the budget. So it's not just a discretionary program that we created, although we gladly would have. It's something that Congress specifically wants to see happening. And so, while it's impossible to say, I think it's the prospects are good. Okay,
great. Fingers crossed. Okay, so does the 24-month extension for research mean that does that mean that the funding portion of research can also be extended beyond the 3 years?
Yeah, so the mechanics of that are going to be tough for us to follow, but our hope is that the expenditures that are during that last 2 years would be for only research activities. So yes, funding can be used. It's not just sort of a no cost, or rather, an extension with no money attached. So funding can continue to be expended during that period, but we expect that will only be for research activities.
Okay. Speaking of research, someone had asked about how do we go about naming our research partner ahead of time and gaining their support for the application before we've gone through an official procurement process? Do you have any tips or guidance there?
Sure. So this is something that we've been working on for a number of years as well. And of course, we cannot speak to your local or state procurement rules or regulations. From the federal perspective, there's new guidance in the form of the super circular, which is reflected in the Department of Justice financial guide, and that essentially makes a distinction between subrecipients and contractors. And I'm probably going to get the language wrong here, but the point is that if an organization or individual is performing mission-critical functions on the grant, they're considered essentially part of the grantee, and we don't require the open and fair and competitive process essentially doesn't apply to that. whereas if you were looking for something that was less reliant on a solid foundation of a relationship and an experience, something like, I'm gonna offend somebody when I say something like this. I'm just gonna say widgets. If you're looking for widgets, and there's going to be a widget maker that's on this webinar who's going to write it afterwards, then that would not be considered a subrecipient, and we would require you know, an open, fair competition for that. So you know, I know that grantees have, or applicants have, struggled with this in the past as well, and that it's not always going to be possible for applicants to name a specific researcher in the application. We think it's so critical to work in partnership from conception with the researcher, so we really hope that that is possible for you. In the event it's not, and I would imagine that there are going to be, you know, some for whom it's not possible, our advice is to be as specific as you can about the criteria that you'll use to select a research partner. So whether that's a draft RFP, scope of work, you know, something that will give us a sense that you have thought through what it is you're looking for and how they're going to contribute to the program.
Great, thank you. We did have a question asking about the average award amount for the past 29 awardees. But earlier in the presentation, Julie went over the award amount and number of grantees for FY12 to FY15, which I think would be useful if folks wanted more information around that. So I'm not seeing any other. Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, yeah, I think that's the answer, is that it's varied over time, in part because we changed the maximum grant award, but I think in the past couple of years, we've ranged from, you know, put in what it costs, I think is the answer, but typically the awards that we make do come close to the maximum award amount.
Great. All right, well, that concludes our question and answer. Thank you so much, Julie. All great information. And I would just encourage all of you to, as you exit the webinar, you'll see a brief survey appear on your screen. And by answering those questions in the survey, you'll be helping the Resource Center improve the services that we provide and offer. And we greatly appreciate it if you would just take a few minutes to complete that survey. And as I mentioned before, you'll be getting an email link to the recording of this presentation, as well as the PDF link, PDF to the PowerPoint slides. All of this information will also be available on the National Reentry Resource page. Thank you very much. Take care.